Sometimes the line between boldness and absurdity is thinner than we realize. In this part of the series, we explore 5 real stories where strange decisions led to shocking, preventable deaths, each more baffling than the last. From fatal stunts to moments of pure misjudgment, these are among the most tragically stupid deaths ever recorded. On July 16, 2025, an absurd and deeply unsettling incident unfolded inside a medical facility on Long Island. Keith McAllister, a 61-year-old man from Long Island, accompanied his wife Adrienne Jones McAllister to Nassau Open MRI in Westbury for what should have been a routine knee scan. But within moments, a devastating sequence of failures turned an ordinary afternoon into a nightmare. Keith's presence in the room, a massive chain around his neck, and a powerful machine created a lethal combination, one that no one stopped in time. Keith was a devoted husband, father, and grandfather. That day, he had gone to the MRI clinic simply to support Adrienne during her appointment. The chain he wore around his neck, a 20-pound piece of weight training equipment, was not just ornamental but familiar. According to Adrienne, the chain had been worn before on previous visits to the same clinic, and it had even been acknowledged by staff. It was not a new or hidden risk. And yet, despite the known dangers posed by magnetic resonance imaging machines, no one reminded him to remove it that day. After Adrienne's knee scan was complete, she needed help getting off the MRI table. A technician, reportedly the same person familiar with Keith and his necklace, left the room and brought Keith inside. This moment would prove fatal. The MRI machine was still active, its powerful magnetic field fully engaged. As Keith stepped toward his wife, the magnet seized the chain around his neck with immense force, yanking his body across the room. The impact was immediate. Adrienne later described the horror of watching her husband go limp in her arms, pulled by a force no human could resist. The MRI machine, having an intense magnetic pull, is capable of turning even small metal objects into dangerous projectiles. Keith's chain became a deadly tether. Adrienne and the technician tried frantically to pull him free, but their efforts were in vain. For nearly an hour, Keith remained pinned to the machine, unresponsive. It wasn't until emergency services finally arrived that he was removed. By then, the damage was irreversible. Keith had suffered multiple heart attacks and was in critical condition. He died the following day. The incident quickly raised disturbing questions. How could such a preventable accident occur in a facility designed to prioritize patient safety? Why was the MRI still active when a non-patient was invited into the room? And most crucially, why wasn't the technician more vigilant, especially knowing Keith's history and his distinctive chain? Authorities have stated that Keith was not authorized to be in the MRI room. However, this claim directly contradicts Adrienne's account, as well as that of her daughter, Samantha Bodden, who created a GoFundMe campaign in the aftermath. According to them, Keith was invited in by the technician specifically to help Adrienne off the table. Samantha emphasized that reports portraying Keith as an intruder were false and damaging, especially given the technician's previous familiarity with both Keith and his chain. The horror did not end with Keith's death. Adrienne has been left emotionally shattered. She described the image of her husband being pulled from her grasp as something that continues to haunt her. She and the technician pleaded for someone to shut down the machine, to call 911, anything. But time slipped away, minute by devastating minute. The fact that Keith remained stuck to the machine for nearly an hour only compounded the tragedy. In the wake of the incident, Keith's family has called for accountability. This was not just an unfortunate accident, they argue, but the result of a clear failure in safety protocol and communication. MRI machines are among the most powerful magnetic devices used in medicine, and their risks are well known. Medical staff are trained to ensure that nothing metallic enters the room during a scan. That one oversight in this case cost a man his life. Keith McAllister's death stands as a haunting reminder of what can happen when routine safety procedures are ignored. It was a death as strange as it was preventable, a major failure in a place that should have been safe. His family continues to grieve, and their questions remain unanswered. On a clear day in April 1988, a routine skydiving session in North Carolina ended in one of the most baffling tragedies in the history of the sport. Ivan Lester McGuire, a 35-year-old veteran skydiver known for his precision and experience, fell to his death from 10,500 feet. The mistake that cost him his life was so basic, so avoidable, that it stunned even the most seasoned professionals in the field. Ivan was no amateur. At the time of his last jump, he had completed over 800 jumps and was deeply embedded in the skydiving community. On April 2nd, he was at the Franklin County Sports Parachute Center to document a student-instructor tandem jump. It was his third jump of the day, and he had done it many times before, filming from the sky, maneuvering with skill, and capturing footage midair. He carried a heavy video camera rig mounted on his body to record the experience. But this time something went horribly wrong. In a moment of distraction or confusion, Ivan failed to secure an essential piece of the puzzle. The jump proceeded as planned. Ivan exited the aircraft just before the student and instructor, his camera capturing their descent. For a few seconds, everything looked normal. But then, as he reached the altitude where a parachute should deploy, the footage began to shake. Ivan's hand came into frame, reaching instinctively for a ripcord that wasn't there. The realization struck, sudden and final. His last recorded words were 4 devastating syllables. "Oh my God, no." The camera continued to roll as Ivan plummeted helplessly to the ground. There was no reserve parachute, no second chance. His body was discovered in a wooded area about 1.5 miles from the airfield. The footage he left behind confirmed to investigators what no one on the ground could have imagined, that an experienced professional had exited a plane without any means to survive. Investigators later considered that the weight and feel of the camera rig may have mimicked the sensation of a parachute on his back. It was a catastrophic lapse in safety awareness, a failure of habit, supervision, and communication. Regulation number 105 mandates that a pilot must verify that every skydiver on board has a parachute. Yet on that fateful flight, no one noticed. Neither the pilot nor any of the others in the plane appeared to realize that Ivan, the experienced cameraman, was missing the single most essential item for survival. Authorities immediately ruled out any intentional self-harm or foul play. This was not a deliberate act or an equipment malfunction. It was a pure and tragic oversight. FAA Inspector Walter Rigsby emphasized that the pilot bears responsibility under federal regulations to confirm each jumper is properly outfitted before exiting. Yet somehow, despite this rule, Ivan was allowed to jump without his parachute. The pilot, Mark Luman, was questioned, and while it was clear no one intended harm, the breakdown in protocol was glaring. Nancy Fayard, the wife of the parachute center's owner, confirmed what others had said. No one on board had noticed Ivan was unequipped. Had anyone looked closely, his life could have been saved. Instead, a moment's inattention, perhaps due to the routine nature of the jump or the assumption that Ivan, of all people, knew what he was doing, cost him everything. Ivan's death shocked the skydiving community. For someone with his experience to die in such a preventable way served as a brutal reminder that no amount of training can overcome human error if safety checks are skipped. It wasn't a freak accident. It wasn't mechanical failure. It was a man simply forgetting his parachute and no one stopping to notice. The incident remains one of the most bizarre and tragic examples of complacency in extreme sports. It exposed vulnerabilities in equipment checks, in the culture of familiarity and trust among seasoned jumpers. Ivan McGuire should not have died that day, but he did, and his haunting final footage now stands as a grim lesson in how devastating a simple oversight can be. On a frigid New Year's Eve afternoon in 2013, a Boston mother lost her life in a harrowing and baffling accident that unfolded in broad daylight. 46-year-old Ora Garcia was simply trying to cross the Meridian Street Bridge, an ordinary task that ended in extraordinary tragedy, leaving her family reeling with grief and questions. Ora was a mother of 2, raising a 15-year-old daughter and a 3-year-old son. She lived in East Boston and, on the day of the incident, was on her way to a medical appointment in Chelsea. Ora was hardworking and devoted to her children. Nothing in her background suggested she was anything but cautious, thoughtful, and family-oriented. The circumstances of her death made its abruptness and horror all the more harder to understand. Around noon that day, Ora began crossing the Meridian Street drawbridge, which spans the Chelsea River between East Boston and Chelsea. At the same time, the bridge operator, Louis Alfieri Jr., a seasoned employee with a 34-year record, initiated the standard procedure to raise the bridge, allowing a boat to pass. The procedure involved flashing red lights, the sounding of a foghorn, and surveillance camera checks to ensure the bridge was clear. Despite these precautions, Ora was still on the span when it began to lift. It remains unclear whether she had begun crossing before or after the warnings were activated. Witnesses recalled hearing her screams as the structure beneath her feet began to tilt. In a desperate attempt to avoid falling, Ora grabbed hold of one of the rising steel plates. Her gray hat was later seen falling from the structure as her cries echoed across the river. Horrified onlookers said her screams lasted nearly a minute. The bridge operator, alerted by her voice, immediately halted the operation and began lowering the bridge. Tragically, the reversal of movement caused Ora to become caught between the two massive plates as they came back together. She suffered catastrophic trauma and was pronounced dead at the scene. Police and emergency responders arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Her body was recovered several hours later, and the bridge was closed to traffic for the duration of the investigation. The operator, visibly distraught, was transported to the hospital for evaluation and placed on unpaid leave, a standard protocol while the incident was reviewed. City officials emphasized that Alfieri had always followed procedure and had no previous infractions. Public reaction to the accident was immediate and emotional. Friends, neighbors, and city leaders rallied around Ora's children, launching fundraising efforts to support them with essentials like food and clothing. Funeral services were organized with help from local organizations and the city, including the donation of a burial plot. East Boston residents showed an outpouring of compassion, many expressing disbelief at the surreal and senseless nature of the accident. City councilors and state representatives voiced their condolences, while the Department of Public Works launched an internal review of the incident. The bridge's video surveillance footage was collected and analyzed, and officials sought to determine whether protocol had failed or whether Ora had entered the bridge too late. What remains undeniable is that Ora's death was a grim convergence of timing, mechanical process, and human vulnerability. In the heart of a modern city, on a routine walk to a medical appointment, she was overtaken by an unforgiving machine she could not outrun. Her final moments, witnessed from a distance and marked by cries for help, have haunted those who heard them. And though authorities ultimately deemed her death a terrible accident, there's no denying it was an absurd one. It was supposed to be a joyful celebration for a baby's first birthday. Instead, it turned into a nightmare, as a seemingly light-hearted party stunt turned fatal for the 20-year-old mother of the baby. On a September day in 2022, surrounded by family and friends in the small New Zealand town of Te Puke, Faith Waterman Batistic lost her life in a shocking and entirely avoidable accident that has left her family devastated and calling for change. Faith was a young mother of two and just over a week away from her 21st birthday. Described by her twin sister Eden as bright and bubbly and full of life, Faith was known for her outgoing personality, infectious energy, and ability to light up any room she entered. The party that day was meant to mark a milestone, her youngest child's first birthday, but instead it would become the setting of a tragic and absurd accident that claimed Faith's life in seconds. As the party unfolded, guests began inhaling helium from balloons filled with gas from a pressurized canister, laughing at the chipmunk-like effect the helium had on their voices. Though initially hesitant, Faith eventually joined in after encouragement from others. The activity, widely considered harmless fun, quickly escalated when someone suggested inhaling directly from the canister itself. Faith was reluctant but finally agreed to try it, unaware of the heightened risks that came with inhaling helium in its pressurized form. At the moment Faith began to inhale, another guest increased the flow of helium from the canister. In a split second, the high-pressure stream shot into the back of her neck. What followed was immediate and terrifying. Faith turned blue and collapsed, her final words a baffled interjection, revealing the instant awareness of something going terribly wrong. Family members, including her mother and cousin, immediately began CPR and continued their efforts for 45 minutes until paramedics arrived. Despite their desperate attempts and 20 additional minutes of resuscitation by emergency crews, Faith could not be revived. Her cause of death was determined to be rapid asphyxiation due to hypoxia. The helium had displaced the oxygen in her lungs, cutting off the body's ability to absorb vital oxygen. Coroner Luella Dunn later confirmed that Faith was unaware of the inherent dangers involved in inhaling helium, particularly from a pressurized canister, which increases the volume of gas entering the body dramatically and dangerously. The investigation revealed that the canister in question, manufactured by Australian company Alpen, did bear a warning label, but in the coroner's opinion it was printed in small type, low on the container, and listed after several other cautions. Though the label explicitly stated not to inhale helium due to the risk of serious injury or death, it lacked the prominence necessary to properly warn users. In response, Coroner Dunn issued a recommendation that warnings on helium canisters be made significantly more visible, advocating for bold front-facing messages that clearly convey the fatal risks. Faith's death shocked her family, who now view helium balloons as traumatic triggers. Eden described the loss of her twin as a uniquely harrowing experience, saying it felt as if she had lost a part of herself. Their 21st birthday was just days away when Faith died, turning what should have been a celebration into a memorial. Years later, her family continues to speak out against the casual use of helium for party entertainment, urging the public to reconsider participating in such stunts and calling for tighter regulations on sales and labeling. They refuse to purchase helium or attend events where it is used. What happened to Faith was a simple, well-meaning moment of group fun that spiraled into a catastrophe because of a basic misunderstanding of danger. Her death stands as a heartbreaking reminder that even the most innocent-seeming activities can have deadly consequences when the risks are not properly understood or communicated. Faith should have lived to raise her children, laugh with her sister, and see many more birthdays. Instead, a tragically absurd accident cut her life short, one that could and should have been prevented. In 2017, a deeply unsettling event unfolded in the forested region of Quanarmunda, Odisha, India. Ashok Bharti, a 54-year-old man from Cuttack, lost his life in a moment that combined recklessness, poor judgment, and tragic miscalculation. What began as a gathering to observe a wild elephant ended in horror, leaving witnesses shocked and officials frustrated by a death that could have been so easily prevented. Ashok was a resident of Cuttack, in the eastern Indian state of Odisha, and had been working with a private construction company in the Sundargarh district at the time. On the morning of the incident, forest officials and villagers had gathered near the forest area to monitor a wild elephant that had strayed from its herd. The animal was visibly agitated and had been acting erratically, separated from its group and surrounded by unfamiliar human presence. Forest authorities were engaged in a careful effort to guide the elephant back to safety before tensions escalated further. Despite the obvious danger and repeated warnings from officials on site, Ashok chose to approach the animal. He was reportedly under the influence of alcohol at the time, and this may have clouded his judgment. With his mobile phone in hand, Ashok moved closer to the elephant, attempting to take a selfie, ignoring the clear distress of the animal and the urgency of the ongoing rescue operation. Witnesses captured the event on video from a safe distance, showing Ashok inching toward the elephant with alarming confidence. As he neared the animal, it suddenly reacted. Already on edge and likely further provoked by the man's presence, the elephant charged. Ashok turned to run, but within seconds he stumbled and fell. The elephant reached him in moments and trampled him, crushing his body. The force and speed of the attack left no time for intervention. Onlookers could only watch in horror as the incident unfolded. An ambulance was immediately called, and Ashok was rushed toward the hospital. However, the injuries he sustained were catastrophic. He died on the way, leaving behind a devastating scene and many unanswered questions. His death was one in a series of fatal encounters with elephants in the area, which had seen increased elephant activity and aggression, especially in villages near Rourkela. Wildlife officials had already been dealing with a pattern of elephant-related incidents, including fatal attacks on a woman and her son in the same region. Forest officials expressed deep frustration at the disregard for safety protocols. Assistant Conservator of Forests Philip Sahu confirmed that the team had been working to disperse villagers from the area when Ashok approached the elephant, ignoring direct warnings. His proximity to the animal, combined with its nervous and isolated state, created a perfect storm for tragedy. Officials also noted that the smell of alcohol on Ashok may have heightened the elephant's agitation, further increasing the likelihood of a violent response. The footage of the incident, widely circulated online, added to public outrage and disbelief. The images showed the split-second decisions that led to an irreversible outcome. While efforts were being made to manage the elephant with care and caution, one man's desire for a photograph disrupted the entire operation and cost him his life. Ashok's death is a sobering example of how modern behaviors, like the global obsession with selfies, can collide fatally with the realities of the natural world. Wildlife, especially when distressed or cornered, should never be approached. His story stands as a baffling, absurd tragedy, one that could have easily been avoided with the slightest restraint